Welcome to our next podcast, and today I thought I'd talk about something that had come up in the news very recently, in fact over the last 24 hours, and that's the sinking of that dive boat in the Red Sea, and what possibly could be the root causes of what is really a trend in incidents at the moment, and that is of small super yacht sized vessels capsizing. Now, the vessel that sank in the Red Sea, it's all very much speculative at the moment, but she was a 44 metre private yacht style, shall we say, working boat called the Sea Story. She was basically off the coast of Egypt, and she was a static vessel, really. She went from place to place, but when she was operating, she was either alongside, at anchor, with long lines out, holding her in position so that she could provide a base for divers and snorkelers to work from in order to view the seabed. Now, she had plenty of accommodation on board, plenty of crew on board. Basically, there were 18 cabins, which could accommodate up to 36 passengers, according to the media, which of course makes her a small passenger vessel, really. But nonetheless, it was owned by an Egyptian national. Rare it was registered, yet to see that. But nonetheless, it was anchored off of the coast of Egypt when the incident happened. Now, according to media reports, it was bad weather, and in this bad weather, they were forecasting seas of around 3 to 4 meters in this part of the world, with gusts of around 35 to 40 knots of wind. Where she apparently suddenly started to capsize, and within 7 minutes had capsized and began to sink. Now, obviously, this is a very short time scale, and it's not only the very short time scale capsizing that we have seen in the immediate past. Talking, of course, about the super yacht, the Baysian, which capsized in a very short amount of time, just a few months ago. Now, at the end of the day, this vessel is a very high vessel. As I say, she's designed like a super yacht, but she does have several decks, and therefore her stability, although I'm sure, and we'll talk about this later on, I'm sure met minimum international standards. Whether or not it met the standards of the flag state, whether or not it met the standards of the port state, that's another thing. But at the end of the day, a very high vessel compared to its relatively shallow draft. From the library pictures that I'm looking at online, a lot of lines attaching her in position. In other words, because of the amount of headlines and stern lines, which in the library pictures are coming out from both port and starboard, same with the stern lines here, I would hazard a guess that they liked to keep her not just in position, but they used to like to keep her on a particular heading, and this may explain what the problem was when she capsized, in that she may have been at a state of being in port. In other words, watertight doors open, shipside doors open, watertight integrity at its lowest, held by these lines in position. If these lines were to part in just moderate winds, such as 35 to 40 knots, and the vessel were to turn broadside onto the seas, the resultant rolling may have meant that she started to downflood and water entered the hull. That's quite speculative, but looking at the library picture, she always seems to have a lot of lines out, a lot of lines securing her both alongside and lines securing her when she was at her dive site. and working the vessel at the dive site. Now, why it happened, as I said, is very, very speculative. Whether or not we will ever find out what happens, now that's another matter, because this thing was owned by an Egyptian. It was in Egyptian territorial waters. Therefore, we are very, very much reliant on the Egyptian authorities to report back on it. I think they're going to be keen to do so, because the place that she was near, a place called Marsa Alam in Egypt, is very, very rich in tourism. And if they don't come to the bottom of it and provide an explanation, then they may see their tourist numbers drop. And at the end of the day, this could be a big deal for the economy of Egypt. Now, this ship obviously has a flag state. Don't know what the flag state was yet. I haven't managed to find anything online that's told me what the flag state is. But flag state and port state both have an obligation really to ensure that vessels like this, particularly vessels carrying 36 passengers, because that makes it a passenger vessel, and even if it comes under the passenger yacht code, doesn't change the fact that it's a passenger vessel. They have an obligation as the flag state to enforce legislation to ensure that the vessel complies with minimum international standards, and the port state, Egypt in this case, obviously have an obligation to ensure that those vessels that are operating within their territorial waters operate again within their own local legislation. Whether or not this is the case is yet to be seen. Whether or not there were things such as a safety management system on board, proper procedures in place, a qualified master on board the ship, or indeed a qualified crew on board the ship that meets minimum international standards, again, something yet to be ascertained. But it's very, very difficult when these vessels are in places that are notorious for not enforcing minimum international standards upon vessels. It's as if these vessels are able to operate underneath the radar, because the resources available to both the port state authorities and perhaps to the flag state authorities are limited, and therefore the ability to inspect the vessel and ensure that the vessel is seaworthy, again, may be limited. So she's always operated in this part of the world, and therefore she hasn't really ventured into any port states that are renowned for their effective port state control. So she's probably going to have been under the radar. This is particularly important when it comes to the implementation of a safety management system. The ISM code applies to all vessels over 500 gross tons and all passenger vessels. Now, although it would appear from the media that this vessel operated very, very close to the coast and may not have put to sea in a legal sense, it would still have required to have on board some form of safety management system, albeit a domestic safety management system, that ensured that there were policies and procedures in place which made sure that in the case of adverse weather, that steps were taken beyond the normal operation condition of the ship to ensure that she was safe. Ships that do not put to sea, ships that are alongside, ships that are at anchor, may not secure their watertight integrity properly. Now, watertight doors are provided internally within the ship to ensure that the watertight compartments remain intact, yet at the same time they allow the ship to operate and people to move from one compartment to the other in order to effectively run the ship. Whilst the ship is in port, or as I say, at anchor, or even as it appears this ship has done from the pictures that I've seen online, operating just a few meters off the beach on lines, this would mean that she wasn't at sea, she wasn't underway, and therefore she would quite likely have ship side doors open, internal watertight doors open. Her watertight integrity would not have been secure. If the weather did increase without warning, then that boat would have moved around considerably. If she did find herself broadside to the waves, and as I say, all the library pictures indicate they needed to hold her in a particular direction, probably to meet the prevailing weather, If she had swung around and presented her broadside to the prevailing weather, this may have caused her to roll heavily. It may have caused a wind heel if the wind speed came up. This could have heeled the vessel over far enough for the water to ingress into the ship, very quickly flowing from compartment to compartment and fundamentally taking away the buoyancy of the ship, reducing her stability and making her very, very likely to succumb to continuous down flooding. The safety management system on board any ship should take into account those conditions where, particularly being at anchor or being at buoys or moored offshore, should take into account the deterioration of the weather and should ensure that at the end of the day, poor weather conditions ensure that the hull is made watertight as soon as possible. Even if the master gets a forecast in which indicates poor weather conditions, then they should be securing the watertight integrity of the ship. This is good seamanship. It's good seamanship on any vessel. If you expect poor weather, if poor weather's on the way, if it's forecast, if it's not forecast, if you see the signs of it appearing, if the wind just starts to pick up without warning, then the watertight integrity of a vessel and the ability for that vessel to withstand the conditions under which you are placing her is paramount. Leaving the vessel in a state that she would normally be in when she was in a protected harbour and alongside is not good enough when it comes to being exposed either at anchor, at buoys or lines slightly off the shore where you don't have the protection of, let's say, a breakwater or a proper harbour. For those of you listening to this podcast that are running vessels, my advice to you is that the passage planning aspect of running these vessels is majorly important, not just getting from A to B, but the conditions that you can expect at the ports at which you call. A lot of these phenomenal weather conditions are local conditions which are mentioned in things like the pilot books, and your research of a port that you go to, you've got to look at the climate. If there are indications within pilot books that the climate there does contain freak weather, then you should consider carefully if you are not alongside safely within a sheltered harbour, if you are exposed in any way, albeit just a few metres from the shoreline, then if you're in an area notorious for sudden high winds or sudden changes in meteorological condition, you take this into account in your procedures. Masters should be leaving instructions for the officer of the watch if the wind shows any sign of increasing, particularly increasing dramatically, particularly associated with high sudden gusts of wind, that steps are immediately taken to secure the watertight integrity of the ship. Indeed, it's good practice within a safety management system for that watertight integrity to be maintained whilst the vessel is exposed to these elements, so that the officer of the watch isn't constantly wondering whether or not to close the watertight door, to close the ship's shell door. If a ship has to be in a state where the watertight integrity is compromised by the operations, then there must be a robust procedure in place to secure that integrity the moment that the officer of the watch or the master suspects that the conditions may be turning. Don't rely on your ability to secure the ship suddenly. Plan ahead for poor weather, put in place the measures, and ensure that even on a relatively modern vessel, you don't get caught out with your hull open to the sea at a time where weather conditions are deteriorating and you are not in a place of shelter. Being exposed to local freakish elements means maintaining your watertight integrity. As I make this podcast, they are finding survivors, having searched the waters around the site there. Obviously, the Red Sea is a warm sea, so survivability in the sea is pretty good as long as you've got the energy to stay afloat or even to make your way ashore to the nearest beach. Then you've got a good chance of survival. I think they have found 5 survivors today. Sadly, I think 4 people are victims of this latest tragedy of the Sea Story. That's the name of the ship, of the Sea Story capsizing. But we'll wait and see whether or not the Egyptian authorities offer a comprehensive and detailed investigation explaining why this incident happened and giving us food for thought as to how to push forward and protect these small vessels when they are anchored or tied in exposed areas with their watertight integrity compromised. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll hopefully catch up with you all again soon. Thank you.